They buried him at 9:47 p.m. No priest, no family, just a few officers standing under the cold rain, watching the dirt cover the coffin. It was supposed to be over. The prisoner had died in custody 3 days earlier, heart failure, they said. But something about the way his body was found didn't sit right with Detective Marlowe. He kept replaying the footage from the cell, the flickering lights, the shadow that crossed the wall seconds before the man collapsed. So he made a decision no one in the department had ever dared before. "Dig him up," he ordered. "We're putting a camera inside the coffin." The morgue staff refused. Even the warden looked pale, but Marlowe wouldn't let it go. Hours later, the camera was lowered into the grave lens pointed at the dead man's face. Everything was silent, still. Then, they turned it on, and what they saw made the entire investigation team scream. Because the man's eyes weren't closed anymore. Stay with me until the end. Because what that camera recorded beneath the dirt wasn't just a sign of life, it was a message. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Detective Sarah Marlowe had been with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for 15 years. She'd seen overdoses, suicides, gang violence, and everything in between. But Marcus Rivera's death was different. Something about it gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night, replaying every detail in her mind like a broken record. Marcus had been serving a 2-year sentence for armed robbery. By all accounts, he was a model prisoner. He kept to himself, read books from the library, and never caused trouble. His cellmate, Tommy Chen, described him as quiet, almost withdrawn. The guards barely noticed him most days. That's what made his sudden collapse so unsettling. The official report stated that Marcus suffered cardiac arrest at approximately 11:23 p.m. on Tuesday night. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, concluded that he died from an undiagnosed heart condition aggravated by stress and poor prison conditions. Case closed, paperwork filed, body prepared for burial. But Marlowe couldn't shake what she'd seen on the security footage. She'd watched that recording dozens of times, frame by frame, studying every shadow and movement. At 11:21 p.m., Marcus was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The overhead lights flickered twice, casting strange shadows across the concrete walls. Then, at exactly 11:22 p.m., a shadow moved across the wall near his bed. Not the shadow of a person or an object, but something else entirely. Something that shouldn't have been there. 30 seconds later, Marcus sat up abruptly, his eyes wide with terror. He looked directly at the security camera, his mouth moving as if he was trying to say something. Then he clutched his chest and collapsed. The prison's medical team arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Marcus Rivera was pronounced dead at 11:47 p.m. What bothered Marlowe most was the expression on Marcus's face in those final moments. It wasn't the look of a man having a heart attack. It was the look of someone who had seen something horrifying, something that shouldn't exist. She'd tried to discuss her concerns with her partner, Detective Jim Walsh, but he dismissed them as overthinking. "Sometimes people just die, Sarah," he'd said. "Heart attacks happen, even to young guys. The stress of prison life, poor diet, lack of exercise. It's not rocket science." But Marlowe knew it was more than that. She'd investigated hundreds of deaths over the years, and her instincts were rarely wrong. There was something about Marcus Rivera's death that didn't add up. That's when she discovered the first inconsistency in the medical examiner's report. Dr. Hoffman had noted signs of cardiac arrest, but she'd also mentioned something else that she'd initially overlooked. Marcus's body temperature was significantly lower than normal for someone who had just died. His skin had an unusual pale, almost grayish tint that didn't match typical post-mortem changes. Most disturbing of all, there were strange marks on his wrists and ankles, faint but visible under ultraviolet light. When Marlowe confronted Dr. Hoffman about these details, the medical examiner became defensive. "Look, detective, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Sometimes bodies present unusual characteristics. It doesn't mean there was foul play involved. The man had a heart attack. That's my final determination. But Marlowe wasn't satisfied. She decided to dig deeper into Marcus Rivera's background, hoping to find something that might explain his mysterious death. What she discovered changed everything. Marcus Rivera wasn't just any ordinary prisoner. Before his arrest, he'd worked as a security guard at Blackwood Research Facility, a private laboratory on the outskirts of town that conducted classified government research. According to his employment records, Marcus had been terminated from his position just 2 weeks before committing the armed robbery that landed him in prison. The robbery itself was bizarre. Marcus had walked into a convenience store at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, pointed an unloaded gun at the cashier, and demanded $47 from the register. He made no attempt to flee and was arrested within minutes. During his interrogation, he seemed almost relieved to be in custody, repeatedly asking if he would be safe in prison. Marlowe contacted Blackwood Research Facility to inquire about Marcus's employment history, but they claimed to have no record of him ever working there. When she pressed for more information, they referred her to their legal department, who informed her that all employee records were classified under federal privacy laws. That's when she knew she was on to something big. Marlowe spent the next 2 days investigating Blackwood Research Facility. What she found was deeply troubling. The company had a history of conducting experimental medical research, much of it funded by shadowy government contracts. There were rumors of unethical human trials, cover-ups, and employees who had died under mysterious circumstances. 3 former Blackwood employees had died in the past 18 months. All 3 deaths were ruled natural causes, but each victim had exhibited the same strange symptoms that Marcus displayed: abnormally low body temperature, unusual skin discoloration, and mysterious marks on their extremities. Marlowe realized she wasn't dealing with a simple prison death. Marcus Rivera had been silenced, and whoever was responsible had the resources and connections to make it look like natural causes. That's when she made the decision that would change everything. She needed proof, and the only way to get it was to examine Marcus's body more closely. But there was a problem. Marcus had already been buried in the county cemetery, and getting approval for an exhumation would take weeks of paperwork and legal battles. Then any evidence would be long gone. So Detective Marlowe decided to take matters into her own hands. She contacted Dr. Angela Foster, a forensic specialist she'd worked with on previous cases. Dr. Foster was known for her unconventional methods and willingness to push boundaries when necessary. When Marlowe explained the situation, Dr. Foster agreed to help, but under one condition: everything had to be done unofficially. "If we're going to do this," Dr. Foster said, "we need to be smart about it. We can't just dig up a body without proper authorization, but there might be another way." Dr. Foster proposed installing a high-resolution camera inside Marcus's coffin. The camera would be equipped with night vision capabilities and motion sensors, allowing them to monitor the body for any signs of decomposition abnormalities or other evidence that might support Marlowe's theory. It was a risky plan that could end both their careers if discovered, but Marlowe was determined to uncover the truth. The operation took place 3 days after Marcus's burial. Marlowe and Dr. Foster, along with 2 trusted technicians, arrived at Riverside County Cemetery just after midnight. Using specialized equipment, they carefully excavated the grave without disturbing the surrounding area. The coffin was made of simple pine wood, as per county regulations for indigent burials. Dr. Foster's team worked quickly and efficiently, drilling a small hole in the coffin lid and installing a waterproof camera system connected to a wireless transmitter. The camera was positioned to capture Marcus's entire upper body, with particular focus on his face and chest area. The system was designed to record continuously for 72 hours, with footage transmitted in real time to Dr. Foster's laboratory. By 3:30 a.m., the grave had been refilled and the evidence of their midnight operation completely concealed. To anyone passing by, it would appear as if nothing had happened. Marlowe and Dr. Foster returned to the laboratory to begin their surveillance. The first several hours showed exactly what they expected. Marcus Rivera's body lying motionless in the coffin, his eyes closed, his hands folded across his chest, just as they'd been positioned by the funeral home. But as the hours passed, something began to change. At approximately 6:15 a.m., just as the sun was rising over Riverside County, the camera detected the first sign of movement. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Marcus's fingers twitched slightly, as if responding to some unseen stimulus. Dr. Foster initially dismissed it as post-mortem muscle contractions, a normal part of the decomposition process. But then it happened again and again. By 8 a.m., the movements had become more pronounced. Marcus's chest appeared to be rising and falling in a rhythm that resembled breathing, though Dr. Foster knew that was impossible. Dead bodies don't breathe. The most disturbing development occurred at 10:47 a.m. Marcus Rivera's eyes opened. Dr. Foster stared at the monitor in complete disbelief. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the camera settings, hoping what she was seeing was just a technical malfunction. But there was no denying it. Marcus Rivera's eyes were wide open, staring directly at the camera lens as if he could see them watching. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the silent laboratory. "He's been dead for 6 days." Detective Marlowe leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The image was crystal clear. Marcus's eyes weren't just open, they were moving, tracking back and forth across the confined space of the coffin, as if he was searching for something. Then, without warning, Marcus's mouth began to move. At first, it looked like he was trying to speak, his lips forming silent words that the camera couldn't capture. But as the minutes passed, his movements became more frantic, more desperate. He was trying to communicate something, and the urge was unmistakable, cannoncy in his expression. "We get audio on this thing?" Marlowe asked, though she already knew the answer. "The system only records video," Dr. Foster replied. "But look at his mouth movements. He's saying the same thing over and over again." They watched in horror as Marcus repeated the same lip movements, his eyes growing wider with each repetition. Dr. Foster grabbed a notepad and began trying to read his lips, jotting down letters and syllables as she deciphered his silent message. "I think he's saying, 'They're coming,'" she said, her voice shaking. "Over and over again. 'They're coming.'" Suddenly, the camera feed flickered and went black for several seconds. When the image returned, everything had changed. Marcus was no longer lying peacefully in the coffin. His body was contorted, his back arched as if he was trying to sit up, despite the confines of the wooden box above him. His hands, which had been folded neatly across his chest, were now clawing at the coffin lid. His fingernails scraped against the wood, leaving deep gouges in the pine surface. The sound must have been horrifying, though they couldn't hear it through the silent video feed. "Jesus Christ," Marlowe muttered. "He's trying to get out." But that wasn't the most terrifying part. What made both women step back from the monitor was the expression on Marcus's face. His eyes weren't just open anymore. They were filled with pure terror. He was looking at something inside the coffin with him, something the camera couldn't see. Dr. Foster quickly checked the timestamp on the recording. It was 11:23 a.m., exactly 12 hours after Marcus had supposedly died in his prison cell. The coincidence sent chills down her spine. "We need to get him out of there," Marlowe said, reaching for her jacket. "Right now." "Sarah, think about what you're saying," Dr. Foster replied. "Even if he's somehow alive, which is medically impossible, we can't just dig up a grave in broad daylight. We'd be arrested before we could explain ourselves." But Marlowe wasn't listening. She was already heading for the door when the camera feed changed again. This time, Marcus had stopped moving entirely. His body went completely rigid, his eyes fixed on a point just above the camera lens. His mouth was open in what appeared to be a silent scream, his face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. Then, slowly, his eyes began to change color. What had been normal brown eyes were now turning a milky white, as if something was growing over the pupils. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable, and it was unlike anything either woman had ever seen in their professional careers. "That's not decomposition," Dr. Foster said, her scientific mind trying to rationalize what she was witnessing. "That's something else entirely." As they watched, thin black veins began to appear across Marcus's face, spreading from his eyes like spider webs. The veins pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, as if something was moving through them. The camera suddenly shook violently, as if the coffin itself was being disturbed from the outside. Dirt and debris fell across the lens, partially obscuring their view, but they could still see Marcus's face, and what they saw made them both gasp in terror. He was smiling. Not a peaceful smile, but something twisted and unnatural. His lips had pulled back to reveal teeth that seemed too sharp, too white, and those milky eyes were now looking directly at the camera again, as if he knew they were watching. That's when they heard the first sound. Despite the camera system being video only, a low humming noise began emanating from the laboratory speakers. It started as barely audible static, but gradually grew louder and more distinct. The sound was unlike anything they'd ever heard, a combination of electronic interference and something that sounded almost organic. "Where is that coming from?" Marlowe asked, frantically checking the equipment. Dr. Foster was already running diagnostic tests on the camera system. "It shouldn't be possible for the audio to transmit through this setup," she said. "The system doesn't have microphone capabilities." But the sound continued to grow louder, and now they could make out what sounded like voices buried within the static. Multiple voices, all speaking at once in languages they couldn't identify. The camera feed flickered again, and when it stabilized, Marcus was no longer alone in the coffin. There were shadows moving around him, dark shapes that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. The shadows had no definite form, but they appeared to be interacting with Marcus's body, touching his face and hands with tendrils of darkness. "This has to be some kind of hoax," Dr. Foster said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Someone's manipulating the feed, playing tricks on us." But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't true. The camera system was her own design, installed by her own technicians. There was no way for anyone else to access or manipulate the signal. The shadows in the coffin began to move more aggressively, wrapping around Marcus's body like smoke. His expression changed from that twisted smile to one of pain and fear. He was fighting against something, struggling with invisible forces that the camera could barely detect. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The shadows vanished, the humming noise ceased, and Marcus's body returned to its original position. His eyes closed, his hands folded across his chest, exactly as they had been when he was first buried. For several minutes, nothing happened. The camera showed only a peaceful corpse, lying in a simple pine coffin. Exactly what anyone would expect to see. "Did we just imagine all of that?" Marlowe asked, though she knew they hadn't. Dr. Foster was already reviewing the recorded footage, fast-forwarding and rewinding through the most disturbing moments. "It's all here," she said. "Every second of it. This actually happened." They continued watching the live feed, hoping for some explanation or sign that would help them understand what they'd witnessed. But Marcus remained motionless, showing no signs of the impossible activity they'd just observed. That's when Dr. Foster noticed something that made her blood run cold. "Look at the timestamp," she said, pointing to the corner of the screen. The digital clock showed 12:47 p.m., but that wasn't what had caught her attention. Below the time display, the camera's motion sensor was still registering movement inside the coffin, even though Marcus appeared to be completely still. "The sensors are picking up activity, but we can't see anything moving," she explained. "It's like there's something there that the camera can't detect." Marlowe leaned closer to the monitor, studying every pixel of the image. What if whatever we saw is still there, but it's invisible to the camera now? The possibility was terrifying. If something supernatural or otherworldly was indeed present in that coffin, They had no way of knowing what it might be doing to Marcus's body. As if responding to their thoughts, the camera began to shake again. This time, the movement was more violent, as if something was trying to break free from inside the coffin itself. The wooden lid, which had remained intact throughout their previous observations, began to crack. Thin lines appeared across the surface, spreading outward like a spider web. The cracks grew wider and deeper until they could see actual gaps forming in the wood. "He's breaking out," Marlowe whispered. But it wasn't Marcus who was breaking the coffin apart. Through the gaps in the lid, they could see something else moving, something dark and fluid that defied explanation. The substance, whatever it was, began seeping through the cracks and spreading across the inside of the coffin. It moved with purpose, flowing around Marcus's body like it was examining him. That's when Marcus's eyes opened again, but this time they were completely black. Not the milky white they'd seen before, but a deep, absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His mouth opened in another silent scream, but now that strange humming sound was back, louder than ever. The dark substance continued to spread until it covered the entire interior of the coffin. Marcus's body began to sink into it, as if the substance was somehow dissolving the wooden bottom of the casket. "We're losing the signal," Dr. Foster announced as the camera feed began to break up into static. The last clear image they saw was Marcus's face, his black eyes staring directly at them through the camera lens. His mouth was moving again, and this time they could clearly read his lips. He was saying their names. The camera feed cut to complete static for 37 seconds. When it returned, both women found themselves staring at an empty coffin. Marcus Rivera's body was gone. The dark substance had vanished as well, leaving behind only the splintered remains of the wooden casket and small piles of dirt that had somehow found their way inside. The camera, still functioning perfectly, showed every detail of the now vacant space where a corpse should have been lying. "That's impossible," Dr. Foster said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bodies don't just disappear. There has to be a logical explanation." But even as she spoke, she was already grabbing her keys and heading for the door. Whatever was happening in that cemetery, they needed to see it with their own eyes. The drive to Riverside County Cemetery took 18 minutes, though it felt like hours. Neither woman spoke during the journey, both lost in their own thoughts about what they'd witnessed. The implications were staggering, and neither wanted to voice what they were both thinking. When they arrived at the cemetery, everything appeared normal. The grass was neatly trimmed, the headstones stood in perfect rows, and there was no sign of any disturbance. Marcus's grave looked exactly as they'd left it 3 days earlier, with fresh soil and a simple wooden marker bearing his name and dates. "Maybe we should call for backup," Dr. Foster suggested, though she wasn't sure who would believe their story. Marlowe was already walking toward the gravesite, her flashlight cutting through the late afternoon shadows. "We need to see what's down there first. If we call this in without evidence, they'll think we've lost our minds." They approached Marcus's grave cautiously, both women scanning the area for any signs of movement or disturbance. The ground around the burial site was undisturbed, showing no evidence that anything had broken through from below. Dr. Foster knelt beside the grave and pressed her ear to the ground. "I don't hear anything," she said. "No movement, no sound. It's completely quiet." That's when they noticed the smell. It wasn't the typical odor of decomposition that might be expected near a fresh grave. Instead, it was something else entirely, a sweet, almost floral scent that seemed to hang in the air around the burial site. "Do you smell that?" Marlowe asked, though she already knew Dr. Foster could smell it too. "It's like jasmine or gardenia," Dr. Foster replied. "But that doesn't make sense. There are no flowers planted here." They decided to dig. Using shovels from Dr. Foster's vehicle, they began carefully excavating the grave. The work was exhausting, but their need for answers drove them forward. As they dug deeper, the sweet floral scent grew stronger, almost overpowering in its intensity. 3 feet down, they hit the coffin lid, or what remained of it. The wooden casket had been completely destroyed from the inside, with pieces of splintered pine scattered throughout the grave. The metal hinges and handles lay twisted and bent, as if something with incredible strength had torn the coffin apart. But there was no body. Marcus Rivera had indeed vanished, leaving behind only shredded fabric from his burial clothes and that inexplicable floral fragrance that seemed to emanate from the empty grave itself. "This violates every law of physics I know," Dr. Foster said, staring into the empty hole. "Dead bodies don't regenerate. They don't develop supernatural strength, and they certainly don't disappear into thin air." Marlowe was examining the twisted metal remnants of the coffin hardware when she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Scratched into one of the metal handles were symbols that definitely hadn't been there when they'd installed the camera. The symbols were unlike anything she'd ever seen, consisting of intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them directly. They appeared to be carved with incredible precision, as if etched by some kind of advanced tool. "Angela, you need to see this," she called. Dr. Foster joined her at the edge of the grave and examined the strange markings. "These look almost like mathematical equations," she said, "but the symbols aren't from any system I recognize." As they studied the mysterious inscriptions, both women began to feel dizzy. The symbols seemed to pulse with their own internal light, creating an optical illusion that made it difficult to focus. The sweet floral scent grew even stronger, now accompanied by a low humming sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. "We need to get out of here," Marlowe said, suddenly overcome by a sense of impending danger. But as they turned to leave, they discovered they were no longer alone in the cemetery. Standing about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a large mausoleum, was a figure watching them. The person was too far away to make out clearly, but they appeared to be wearing dark clothing and seemed unusually tall and thin. "Hey!" Marlowe called out, her hand instinctively moving toward her service weapon. "Police! Come over here!" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to glide backward, disappearing behind the mausoleum without making any visible walking motions. Dr. Foster grabbed Marlowe's arm. "Did you see the way that person moved? It wasn't natural." They approached the mausoleum carefully, their flashlights sweeping the area for any sign of the mysterious observer. But when they reached the spot where the figure had been standing, they found only empty grass and the lingering trace of that same floral scent. "Whoever that was, they're gone now," Marlowe said, though she continued scanning the cemetery for any movement. That's when Dr. Foster made a discovery that changed everything. Near the base of the mausoleum, partially hidden beneath a pile of dead leaves, was a small electronic device. It looked like a sophisticated listening device or transmitter, clearly more advanced than anything available to local law enforcement. "Someone's been monitoring us," she said, holding up the device. "This is military-grade surveillance equipment." The implications were staggering. Someone with access to advanced technology had been tracking their investigation from the beginning. The mysterious figure they'd seen might have been the person responsible for whatever had happened to Marcus Rivera. Marlowe examined the device more closely and found a small inscription on its base: "Property of Blackwood Research Facility." "Now we're getting somewhere," she said grimly. "This connects everything back to Marcus's former employer." They decide Foster's laboratory to return to Doctor to analyze their findings, and as they walked back toward their vehicle, both women had planned their next move. But the unsettling feeling that they were still being watched. The drive back was tense, with both constantly checking their mirrors for signs of surveillance. The electronic device sat between them on the passenger seat, a tangible reminder that their investigation had attracted dangerous attention. Back at the laboratory, Dr. Foster began analyzing the surveillance device, while Marlowe researched Blackwood Research Facility more thoroughly. What she discovered painted a disturbing picture of a company involved in projects that pushed the boundaries of ethical science. Blackwood had been founded 15 years earlier by Dr. Edmund Blackwood, a former government researcher who'd been dismissed from several federal programs for conducting unauthorized experiments. The company's official mission statement claimed they developed medical technologies for treating rare diseases, but their actual research seemed far more sinister. According to classified documents Marlowe accessed through her law enforcement databases, Blackwood had been investigated multiple times for conducting illegal human trials. Former employees had reported seeing test subjects who exhibited signs of severe psychological trauma, and several had died under mysterious circumstances. Most disturbing of all, 3 other former Blackwood employees had died in the past year, all exhibiting the same strange symptoms that Marcus had shown: abnormally low body temperature, unusual skin discoloration, and those mysterious marks on their extremities. "I think I know what happened to Marcus," Dr. Foster said, looking up from her analysis of the surveillance device. "And it's worse than we imagined." She'd managed to extract data from the device's memory chip, revealing weeks of recorded conversations between Marlowe and Dr. Foster. But more importantly, it had also captured audio from inside Marcus's coffin during the time their camera had been recording. "Listen to this," she said, playing back a segment of the audio. The recording was filled with static and interference, but underneath the electronic noise, they could hear voices. Multiple voices speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Most of the conversation was unintelligible, but certain phrases came through clearly. "Subject 7 is responding faster than anticipated," one voice said. "The transformation process has accelerated beyond our projections," replied another. "We need to retrieve the specimen before it reaches full development," a third voice added. The voices continued for several minutes, discussing what sounded like a complex scientific procedure involving something called Project Metamorphosis. They mentioned monitoring vital signs, tracking cellular changes, and the need to maintain absolute secrecy. Then, near the end of the recording, they heard something that made both women freeze in horror. It was Marcus's voice, clear and unmistakable, speaking from inside the supposedly sealed coffin. "Help me," he said, his voice filled with terror and confusion. "They did something to me. I can feel it changing. Me from the inside. Please, someone help me." The recording continued with Marcus pleading for help, describing sensations of his body transforming in ways he couldn't understand. He spoke of feeling his bones reshaping, his organs relocating, and his consciousness expanding beyond normal human limits. "This is what they wanted," his voice continued. "They needed someone who would die in custody, someone whose death wouldn't be questioned. They injected me with something before I was arrested. The heart attack was just the trigger to begin the process." Dr. Foster stopped the playback, both women staring at each other in stunned silence. "He was alive the entire time," Marlowe said. "They used him as some kind of test subject for whatever sick experiment they're conducting. But that doesn't explain how he disappeared from the coffin," Dr. Foster replied, "or what those shadows were that we saw on the video feed." They continued analyzing the audio recording, discovering more disturbing details about Marcus's condition. According to his own descriptions, his body had been undergoing some kind of accelerated evolutionary process, developing new abilities and characteristics that defied medical understanding. He spoke of being able to see in complete darkness, of sensing the presence of other living beings from great distances, and of feeling his physical form becoming more fluid and adaptable. Most terrifying of all, he described losing his sense of individual identity, as if his consciousness was merging with something larger and more powerful. The final minutes of the recording were the most chilling. Marcus's voice became increasingly distorted, as if his vocal cords were changing along with the rest of his body. His words became harder to understand, but his message was clear. Whatever Blackwood had done to him was irreversible, and he was no longer entirely human. "They're coming for the others," his transformed voice whispered. "All the former employees who knew too much. I can sense them. I can smell their fear, and soon I'll be able to find them." The recording ended abruptly, leaving Marlowe and Dr. Foster with more questions than answers. "We need to warn the other former Blackwood employees," Marlowe said. "If Marcus is hunting them, they're all in danger." But as she reached for her phone to make the calls, the lights in the laboratory suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. Both women grabbed their flashlights and began checking the building's electrical systems, but everything appeared to be functioning normally. That's when they heard the sound. It was the same low humming they'd heard through the camera's audio feed, but now it was coming from somewhere inside the building. The sound seemed to move through the walls, growing louder and more distinct as it approached their location. "He's here," Dr. Foster whispered. They could hear footsteps in the hallway outside the laboratory, but they weren't normal human footsteps. The sound was more like something heavy and fluid moving across the floor, accompanied by a wet, sliding noise that made both women's skin crawl. The laboratory door, which had been securely locked, began to rattle in its frame. Whatever was on the other side was trying to get in, but it wasn't using conventional methods. The door itself seemed to be warping and bending, as if the metal was becoming malleable under some kind of intense pressure. Marlowe drew her service weapon and aimed it at the door, though she had serious doubts about whether bullets would be effective against whatever Marcus had become. The humming sound grew louder, now accompanied by what sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. The words were in that same unknown language they'd heard on the camera feed, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The humming ceased, the footsteps faded away, and the door returned to its normal shape. The building's main lighting flickered back on, and the laboratory was once again filled with normal fluorescent illumination. But they both knew Marcus was still out there somewhere, transformed into something beyond human understanding, and apparently hunting the people connected to Blackwood Research Facility. The question was no longer what had happened to Marcus Rivera. The question was what he was planning to do next. Dr. Foster quickly pulled up the building's security system on her computer, scanning through the camera feeds from the hallways and exterior entrances. What she found made her hands shake as she pointed at the monitor. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely steady. "The cameras show absolutely nothing in the hallways. No movement, no disturbance. But listen to the audio feeds." She cranked up the volume, and immediately they could hear that same wet, sliding sound moving through the corridors. The audio was picking up something that the visual cameras couldn't detect, as if Marcus had somehow become invisible to electronic surveillance. Marlowe studied the security feeds more closely and noticed something even more disturbing. "The timestamps are wrong," she said. "Look at the corridor cameras. They're showing footage from 3 hours ago, but the audio is live." It was as if whatever Marcus had become possessed the ability to manipulate electronic systems, creating false visual feeds while moving freely through the building. The implications were terrifying. If he could fool security cameras, what other technology could he control? That's when Dr. Foster's computer screen flickered and went black for a moment. When it came back online, there was a new file on the desktop that hadn't been there before. The file was simply labeled, "Watch Me." "Don't open that," Marlowe warned. But Dr. Foster was already double-clicking the icon. The video file opened to show a recording that appeared to have been taken inside the laboratory where they were currently sitting. But in the video, the room was empty except for a figure standing in the shadows near the back wall. The figure was tall and impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. As they watched in horror, the figure stepped into the light, revealing what Marcus Rivera had become. His face was still recognizable, but everything else about him had changed dramatically. His skin had taken on a grayish, almost translucent quality that allowed them to see dark veins pulsing beneath the surface. His eyes were those same black voids they'd seen on the camera feed, and his mouth had stretched into a grotesque smile that revealed teeth that had grown into sharp, needle-like points. But the most disturbing change was in his proportions. Marcus's body had elongated and twisted, as if his bones had been stretched and reshaped by some impossible force. His arms hung down past his knees, and his fingers had extended into claw-like appendages that scraped against the floor as he moved. In the video, this transformed version of Marcus looked directly at the camera and began to speak. His voice was distorted and layered, as if multiple people were talking at once. "Detective Marlowe, Dr. Foster, thank you for watching over me during my transformation. Your surveillance was most helpful in documenting the process." The creature that had once been Marcus tilted its head at an angle that would have been impossible for a normal human neck to achieve. "I know you have questions about what Blackwood did to me, about Project Metamorphosis. Allow me to enlighten you. They didn't just inject me with some experimental drug. They infected me with something far more ancient and powerful." The video showed Marcus moving around the laboratory with fluid, unnatural movements, occasionally pausing to examine equipment with those elongated fingers. "The substance they introduced into my bloodstream wasn't created in their laboratories. It was discovered, deep underground, in caves that haven't seen sunlight for millions of years. They found something that had been waiting, dormant, for the right host to awaken it." Dr. Foster paused the video, her face pale with realization. He's talking about some kind of parasitic organism, something that takes over its host and transforms them. "But how is he making this video?" Marlowe asked. "When was this recorded? We've been here the whole time." Dr. Foster checked the file properties and found something that made her blood run cold. According to the metadata, the video had been recorded 12 minutes in the future. "That's impossible," she whispered. "This file shows it was created at 8:47 p.m., but it's only 8:35 p.m. right now." They resumed playing the video, and Marcus continued his explanation. "The organism doesn't just change the host's physical form. It grants abilities that transcend normal human limitations. I can move through time in ways you cannot comprehend. I can manipulate electronic systems with thought alone. And most importantly, I can sense the location of anyone who has been exposed to Blackwood's research." The transformed Marcus moved closer to the camera, his black eyes seeming to stare directly at Marlowe and Dr. Foster through the screen. "There are others like me now, other former Blackwood employees who were selected for the program. We are no longer bound by human limitations or human morality. We have become something far superior." The video showed Marcus reaching toward the camera with one of his elongated hands, and as his fingers made contact with the lens, the screen filled with static. When the image cleared, they were looking at real-time footage of themselves sitting in the laboratory, watching the video. Marcus was standing directly behind them, though when they spun around in their chairs, nothing was there. "He's manipulating the video feed in real time," Dr. Foster said, her voice shaking. "He's showing us what he wants us to see." The video continued with Marcus's distorted voice providing narration over the live footage of them in the laboratory. "Dr. Foster, your expertise in forensic science will be quite useful to our cause. Detective Marlowe, your investigative skills and access to law enforcement databases make you valuable as well. You have both seen too much to be eliminated, but you have also proven your worth." On the screen, they watched themselves frantically checking the room for any sign of Marcus's presence, but the cameras showed only empty space around them. "You have a choice to make. Join us willingly, and the transformation will be gentle, allowing you to retain your consciousness and memories. Resist, and the process will be far more traumatic, though the end result will be the same." The video feed suddenly switched to show the exterior of the building, where dozens of figures stood motionless in the parking lot. Each figure had the same elongated, transformed appearance as Marcus, and they were all facing the laboratory building with those same black, void-like eyes. "My brothers and sisters are waiting outside, all former Blackwood employees who have completed their metamorphosis. We are building a new society, one freed from the limitations of human frailty and mortality." Marlowe moved to the window and peered through the blinds. The parking lot appeared empty, but she could sense movement in the shadows, shapes that seemed to shift and flow just beyond the edge of visibility. "They're really out there," she confirmed. "I can't see them clearly, but something is definitely surrounding the building." The video continued with Marcus explaining the true scope of Blackwood's project. According to him, the company had been conducting these experiments for over a decade, creating dozens of transformed individuals who now operated as a collective consciousness. Dr. Edmund Blackwood believed he was creating the next step in human evolution. What he actually did was awaken something that had been sleeping beneath the earth for eons, something that had been waiting for intelligent hosts to help it spread across the surface world. The implications were staggering. If Marcus was telling the truth, then Blackwood Research Facility had inadvertently unleashed an ancient parasitic organism that was now using human hosts to establish itself in the modern world. The organism learns from each host it transforms. It absorbs their memories, their skills, their knowledge. Through us, it has learned about human technology, human society, human weaknesses. And now it is ready to expand beyond the small group of Blackwood employees. Dr. Foster was frantically taking notes, trying to document everything Marcus was revealing. If this organism can transform people and control their consciousness, it could potentially infect the entire human population. But why are they telling us all this? Marlowe asked. If they wanted to transform us, why not just do it? Why give us this elaborate explanation? The answer came from Marcus himself, as if he had heard her question. Because the organism values intelligence and free will, forced transformation creates inferior hosts. Those who choose to join us willingly become far more powerful and retain more of their original personality. We are offering you the opportunity to evolve voluntarily. The video showed Marcus moving through the laboratory again, this time examining Dr. Foster's research equipment and files. Your investigation has provided us with valuable data about our own transformation process. The camera footage you recorded will help us refine the procedure for future hosts. In a way, you have already contributed to our cause. Dr. Foster realized with growing horror that their surveillance of Marcus's transformation had been exactly what the creatures wanted. They had documented the entire metamorphosis process, creating a detailed record that could be used to improve the transformation technique. We played right into their hands, she said. They used us to study themselves. The video feed switched to show the interior of Blackwood Research Facility, revealing laboratories filled with sophisticated equipment and holding cells that appeared to be designed for containing transformed subjects. The facility is still operational, though Dr. Blackwood himself did not survive his own transformation. The organism found his consciousness too rigid, too controlling. He was absorbed completely, leaving only his memories and knowledge behind. The camera moved through the facility, showing room after room of advanced scientific equipment that was clearly being used to study and refine the transformation process. In one laboratory, they saw what appeared to be samples of the parasitic organism itself, kept in specialized containment units. The organism reproduces slowly but efficiently. Each transformed host can create the biological material needed to transform others. We have been building our numbers gradually, carefully selecting candidates who possess the intelligence and skills we require. Marlowe felt a chill as she realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a single transformed individual or even a small group. Marcus and his fellow creatures were part of a larger plan to systematically replace human society with their transformed versions. How long have they been doing this? She asked. The answer came immediately through the video feed. The first successful transformation occurred 3 years ago. Since then, we have created 47 fully transformed hosts, each contributing their unique skills and knowledge to our collective. We have individuals with expertise in science, technology, government, law enforcement, and medicine. The implications were terrifying. If transformed individuals had infiltrated government agencies and law enforcement organizations, they could manipulate investigations, suppress evidence, and protect their operations from discovery. That explains how they've been able to cover up the deaths of former Blackwood employees, Dr. Foster said. They have people on the inside controlling the investigations. The video showed Marcus standing in what appeared to be a command center filled with monitors displaying information about potential transformation candidates. Marlowe recognized several of the faces on the screens as prominent local officials and business leaders. Phase 2 of our expansion will begin soon. We have identified key individuals in positions of power and influence who will serve as optimal hosts. Once they are transformed, we will control the infrastructure necessary to accelerate the process exponentially. Marcus turned to face the camera directly, his transformed features twisted into that grotesque smile. But first, we must deal with the two individuals who know too much about our operations. Detective Marlowe, Dr. Foster, your time for decision-making is running out. The laboratory lights began to flicker again, and that familiar humming sound started to emanate from the walls around them. But this time, the sound was much louder and seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. They're not just outside anymore, Marlowe said, drawing her weapon. They're in the building. Dr. Foster grabbed her research files and the surveillance device they'd recovered from the cemetery. We need to get this information to someone who can stop them. The CDC, the FBI, someone with the resources to deal with this. But as they moved toward the laboratory exit, they found their path blocked by a figure standing in the doorway. It was another transformed individual, though not Marcus. This one appeared to have once been a woman, but the same elongation and distortion had changed her into something barely recognizable as human. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the creature said in a voice that layered multiple tones together. Former medical examiner. I was the one who falsified Marcus's death certificate. Marlowe recognized the name immediately. Dr. Hoffman had been the medical examiner who'd conducted Marcus's initial autopsy and declared his death to be from natural causes. You've been part of this from the beginning, she said, keeping her weapon trained on the transformed figure. I was transformed 6 months ago, Dr. Hoffman replied. The organism found my medical knowledge particularly valuable. Through me, it learned how to manipulate death certificates, autopsy reports, and medical records to conceal our activities. The creature that had been Dr. Hoffman stepped into the laboratory, moving with the same fluid, unnatural gait they'd seen from Marcus. Behind her, 2 more transformed figures entered the room, effectively surrounding Marlowe and Dr. Foster. The time for choice has arrived, one of the new arrivals said. Join us willingly or be transformed by force. The outcome will be the same, but your experience of the process will be vastly different. Dr. Foster clutched her research files closer to her chest. What guarantee do we have that we'll retain our consciousness if we agree? None, Dr. Hoffman replied with that twisted smile. The organism decides what aspects of the host personality to preserve based on their usefulness, but resistance guarantees complete absorption of your individual identity. Marlowe looked around the laboratory, searching for any possible escape route. The transformed creatures had positioned themselves to block all exits, and their elongated limbs gave them a significant reach advantage. What about the other people who know about this investigation? She asked, hoping to buy time. My partner, Detective Walsh, the laboratory technicians who helped install the camera equipment. If something happens to us, they'll know where to look. The creature that had been Dr. Hoffman tilted its head at that impossible angle. Detective Walsh suffered a heart attack this evening at approximately 7:30 p.m. He is currently in the intensive care unit at Riverside General Hospital, where our associates will ensure he receives the appropriate medical care. The implication was clear. They had already neutralized Detective Walsh, and they knew about everyone else involved in the investigation. The technicians who assisted with the camera installation have also been contacted. They are being offered the same choice we are extending to you. Most have already agreed to join us voluntarily. Dr. Foster realized that their entire support network had been compromised. The transformed creatures had been watching their investigation from the beginning, identifying everyone involved, and systematically eliminating or converting them. You're building an army, she said. We are building a new world, Dr. Hoffman corrected. One where death is merely a transition to a higher form of existence. one where individual limitations are replaced by collective knowledge and power. The humming sound grew louder, and Marlowe could feel a strange vibration in the air around them. The other transformed creatures began to emit the same sound, creating a harmonious but deeply unsettling chorus that seemed to resonate in her bones. The transformation process begins with exposure to our collective consciousness, Dr. Hoffman explained. The sound you are hearing carries information that will prepare your neural pathways for integration with the organism. Marlowe felt her vision beginning to blur slightly, and she noticed that Dr. Foster was swaying on her feet as if the sound was affecting her balance. "Fight it," she said, though her own voice sounded strange and distant. "Don't let them get into your head." But the humming continued to intensify, and with it came a flood of images and sensations that weren't her own. She could see flashes of Marcus's transformation, feel the pain and terror he'd experienced as his body changed, and sense the alien presence that had taken control of his consciousness. More disturbing still, she could feel the collective thoughts of all the transformed individuals, their shared knowledge and memories flowing through her mind like a river of information. She saw the true scope of their operations, the dozens of people who had already been transformed, and the detailed plans for expanding their influence throughout the region. "Stop fighting." Dr. Hoffman's voice seemed to come from inside her own head now. "Embrace the evolution. Become something greater than human." Dr. Foster collapsed to her knees, her research files scattering across the laboratory floor. The surveillance device they'd recovered from the cemetery rolled away, its metal surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Marlowe struggled to maintain her focus, but the collective consciousness was overwhelming. She could feel her individual thoughts being pulled into the larger network, her memories and experiences becoming part of something vast and alien. That's when she noticed something that the transformed creatures had overlooked. The surveillance device from Blackwood Research Facility was still recording. Its small LED indicator was blinking steadily, showing that it was transmitting data to some remote location. If she could somehow alert the authorities to what was happening, there might still be a chance to stop the spread of the organism. Fighting against the effects of the collective consciousness, Marlowe forced herself to move toward the device. The transformed creatures were so focused on the transformation process that they didn't notice her slow, deliberate movement across the laboratory floor. She managed to reach the device and, using the last of her individual willpower, activated its emergency broadcast function. The device was designed to transmit urgent signals directly to federal law enforcement agencies in case of security breaches or other emergencies. A high-pitched beeping sound filled the laboratory as the device sent out its distress signal, complete with GPS coordinates and a brief audio recording of what was happening in the room. The transformed creatures immediately stopped their humming and turned toward the device with expressions of rage and concern. "You have made a grave mistake," Dr. Hoffman said, her distorted voice filled with anger. "Now we will have to accelerate our timeline and deal with federal interference." But the damage was done. Somewhere in a federal monitoring station, agents were already responding to the emergency signal, dispatching teams to investigate the disturbance at Dr. Foster's laboratory. Marlowe felt the collective consciousness pulling at her mind again, but she had managed to buy precious time. The question was whether help would arrive before the transformation process was complete. As the transformed creatures closed in around her, she could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching. The federal response team was on its way, but would they be equipped to handle something as unprecedented as an alien parasite that could transform human beings into collective consciousness entities? The battle for humanity's future was about to begin, and Detective Sarah Marlowe had just fired the opening shot. The helicopters grew louder, their searchlights cutting through the darkness outside Dr. Foster's laboratory. But inside, something far more terrifying was unfolding. The transformed creatures had stopped their humming, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. Dr. Hoffman's elongated form moved with impossible speed, reaching the surveillance device in a single fluid motion. Her claw-like fingers wrapped around the metal casing, and sparks flew as she crushed it like paper. The emergency beacon died with a final electronic wheeze. "Too late," she said, her layered voice carrying notes of satisfaction. "The signal has already been sent, but it matters little. We have contingencies for federal interference." Marlowe struggled to her feet, her mind still reeling from the partial exposure to the collective consciousness. Through the laboratory windows, she could see the federal helicopters circling the building, their spotlights sweeping across the parking lot, where dozens of transformed creatures waited in the shadows. "They don't know what they're walking into," she said, her voice hoarse from the strain of fighting the alien influence. "No," Dr. Hoffman agreed. "They expect human terrorists or perhaps a chemical weapons incident. They are not prepared for something that transcends their understanding of biology and consciousness." Dr. Foster was slowly recovering from her collapse, gathering her scattered research files with trembling hands. The partial transformation attempt had left her disoriented, but her scientific mind was still functioning. "The organism," she managed to say. "How does it spread? Direct contact? Airborne transmission?" One of the other transformed creatures, a tall figure that might once have been a man in his 30s, stepped forward. "Dr. Michael Chen, former biochemist at Blackwood. The organism requires direct injection into the bloodstream for full transformation. However, prolonged exposure to our collective consciousness can create partial infection." The implications were devastating. If the federal agents entering the building were exposed to the transformed creature's mental influence, they could become carriers of the organism, spreading it throughout government agencies. Outside, the sound of vehicles arriving joined the helicopter noise. Marlowe could see tactical teams positioning themselves around the building, preparing for what they assumed would be a conventional hostage situation. "We need to warn them," she said, moving toward the laboratory's communication equipment. But Dr. Hoffman blocked her path with one elongated arm. "I think not, Detective. Your federal friends will serve our purposes quite well. Each new host we acquire brings us closer to critical mass." The laboratory's intercom system crackled to life, filled with static that resolved into a familiar, distorted voice. It was Marcus, speaking from somewhere else in the building. "Brothers and sisters, the time for concealment has ended. Federal forces are attempting to breach our sanctuary. Initiate Protocol 7. Dr. Foster looked up from her files, her face pale with realization. "Protocol 7. What does that mean?" The transformed Dr. Chen smiled, that same grotesque smile they'd seen from Marcus. "Full exposure. We will no longer hide what we have become. The federal agents will witness our true capabilities, and their reports will spread fear throughout the government hierarchy. Fear serves our purposes," Dr. Hoffman added. "When humanity realizes beyond their comprehension, there they are facing something social structures will begin to collapse. In the chaos that follows, we will emerge as the new dominant species." Marlowe could hear boots on the stairs outside the laboratory, getting closer with each passing second. The federal tactical team was making their way through the building, completely unaware of what awaited them. "How many of you are there?" she asked, hoping to gather intelligence that might help the approaching agents. "In this facility, 12 fully transformed hosts," Dr. Chen replied. "But throughout the region, we number in the hundreds. Every former Blackwood employee, their families, selected government officials, medical personnel. We have been very thorough in our recruitment." The number was staggering. If hundreds of people had already been transformed, then the organism had achieved a level of penetration that made containment nearly impossible. Dr. Foster was studying her, research notes with desperate intensity. "There has to be a weakness," she muttered. "Every biological system has vulnerabilities. The organism might be advanced, but it's still subject to natural laws." "The organism has existed for millions of years," Dr. Hoffman said, her black eyes fixed on Dr. Foster. "It has survived ice ages, mass extinctions, and countless other catastrophes. Your human science is barely 3 centuries old. What makes you think you can find a weakness that evolution has not already eliminated? But Dr. Foster wasn't listening. She'd found something in her notes that made her eyes widen with sudden understanding. The temperature, she said. When we first examined Marcus's body, you noted that his temperature was abnormally low, and in the audio recordings from the coffin, he mentioned feeling cold, even underground. Dr. Hoffman's expression shifted slightly, the first sign of concern Marlowe had seen from any of the transformed creatures. The organism requires a specific temperature range to function properly. Dr. Foster continued, her voice gaining strength. That's why the transformation process is so gradual. It has to slowly adapt the host's metabolism to accommodate the parasite's needs. Interesting theory, Dr. Chen said, but there was tension in his distorted voice. Unfortunately, you will not have the opportunity to test it. The laboratory door burst open, and federal agents in tactical gear poured into the room. They were equipped with night vision goggles, automatic weapons, and body armor designed to handle the most dangerous human threats. They were not prepared for what they found. "Federal agents! Everyone on the ground now!" the team leader shouted, his weapon trained on the group of figures in the center of the laboratory. For a moment, nobody moved. The transformed creatures stood perfectly still, their elongated forms casting impossible shadows under the harsh fluorescent lights. The federal agents hesitated, clearly confused by what they were seeing. "What the hell are those things?" one agent whispered into his radio. That's when Dr. Hoffman made her move. She launched herself across the laboratory with inhuman speed, covering the distance to the tactical team in less than a second. Her elongated limbs moved like liquid, bending and stretching in ways that defied anatomy. The agents opened fire, their automatic weapons filling the air with gunshots and muzzle flashes. But the bullets seemed to have little effect on Dr. Hoffman's transformed body. Where they struck her, dark fluid leaked out instead of blood, and the wounds closed almost immediately. "Fall back! Fall back!" the team leader screamed into his radio. "We need heavy weapons! These aren't human!" Dr. Chen and the other transformed creature joined the attack, moving with the same impossible speed and agility. The federal agents found themselves facing opponents who could absorb gunfire, move faster than human. Reflexes could track and bend their bodies in ways that made them nearly impossible to hit. Marlowe grabbed Dr. Foster and pulled her behind one of the laboratory tables as chaos erupted around them. The transformed creatures weren't trying to kill the agents, she realized. They were trying to capture them alive. "They want to transform them," she shouted over the gunfire. "We have to get out of here." But escape seemed impossible. The laboratory had only one exit, and it was blocked by the battle between the federal agents and the transformed creatures. Through the windows, Marlowe could see more helicopters arriving, disgorging additional tactical teams onto the building's roof. And that's when everything changed forever. The federal response team was eventually overwhelmed, with most agents either transformed or eliminated. Dr. Foster's temperature theory proved correct, but by then it was too late to implement any meaningful countermeasures. Within 72 hours, the transformed creatures had infiltrated key government positions across 3 states. Marcus Rivera's death in that prison cell was never just about one man. It was the beginning of humanity's darkest chapter, orchestrated by something ancient that had waited millions of years for the perfect opportunity to reclaim the surface world. Detective Marlowe's camera didn't just record a resurrection. It documented the birth of a new species. The official reports were classified, the witnesses silenced, and the public never learned the truth about what happened in that laboratory. But sometimes, late at night, people in Riverside County still report seeing tall, impossibly thin figures moving through the shadows, their black eyes searching for the next candidates for transformation. What started as one detective's curiosity became humanity's greatest nightmare, proving that some mysteries are better left buried. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay vigilant. You never know who might be watching you back.